Good evening. It's kind of yucky. The day felt long with the senior stuff, and yet you came back up the hill for some more. I'm grateful that you did. A great choice you made, and I hope that you can walk away feeling like you've been blessed to be here. A couple of things just to make observations about. Aaron Bell preached this morning, and so whatever this chemo is about to do is second chemo. So whatever's going on with him, it's not preventing him from preaching. And so we can rejoice about that and know that he's going to do what he can with what he's got. I saw something I haven't seen in a year and 3 months on Friday at Mac Ramsey's retirement. Randy Carlton's face. I walked up to him and I said, "Who are you?" And he told me who he was. I said, "You're more handsome than I remember you being." That wasn't the right thing to say, a guy to a guy. But, that's what you say when yeah, all right. I thought, shouldn't you be disbarred or something, or whatever they do to physicians who, break the rules or whatever. But it was great. We were outside. It's a beautiful day. And Mac he's kicking the whole principal thing. Now he's going to be just a Bible teacher. And so we celebrate with him. And that was a good occasion for that. Don Smith comes up to me, and I appreciate, he is a preacher. He'll always be a preacher, even when he doesn't preach like he used to. But to get up, I hope one of these days to use him a little like that. But he comes walking up to me tonight, and he says, "Are you going to get David out of trouble tonight?" Now, those of you who know, we're going right along 1 Samuel chapter 30. David gets in a little trouble. His wives get stolen and kidnapped, and he just comes walking up to me, and Don says, "You tell me you're going to get David out of trouble tonight." So we're going to get David out of trouble. I love that. But before we do, let me just share something. I just thought of Mickey Andrews for some reason today. I have today my Cubs tie on. It's underneath my Cardinal tie. Let me prove it. And do you know why? Because they're underneath the Cardinals in the standings too. I just want you to know. And because of that, I am wearing the tie. Ryan, where are you? I am wearing the tie. You just can't see it. That's the best way to wear a Cub tie. You got Yeah. Anyway, so I made a promise I would wear that tie, and I did. Although it was at a funeral, now it's at a church service underneath the Cardinal one. 1 Samuel chapter 30 is where we are tonight. Being a good storyteller is a gift, and those people who have that are enjoyable to listen to, and it becomes real prevalent, real obvious when somebody has this gift. One guy who's got this is Daryl Hyde's son, Brad, has this storytelling. It's just the way he tells it gets you caught up in it, and you snagged at the very beginning, and he keeps you with the whole thing. I don't have that gift. Not many people do, but recognizing good storytelling is by seeing not only what they say, but how they say it, and the order and the organization that they unveil the details. It's all interesting. And I think that helps us to kind of understand Scripture once in a while. Our source of authority, that story, the way God shares with us what he does in history and what he wants from us is in the form of a story. Unlike any other religion, the Christian faith is rooted in a story that God has unveiled over time. And it's a wonderful story. It's a narrative. It's true. It's accurate. It is inspired. And we believe not only the words are inspired, but the way it tells the story shares something important to us. The meaning is found not just in words, but in the way the story is told. And so we'll notice once in a while that chronological order is not honored. That drives us Americans crazy. We're linear. We are chronological people. But the Bible is not in chronological order. And even some of the books themselves don't tell the story in chronological order. So in 1 Samuel, as we're reading along this, the battles come up. Chapter 28, this battle that's going to actually take place in chapter 31 is first talked about. So chapter 28, you're prepared for there to be this battle. But as the Philistines gather for war, you're sitting here thinking the action's going to start. Here it goes. You're going to hear gunfire or whatever their sounds of war was. But the scene then freezes in chapter 28. And we're taken then to Saul, who makes this trip to Endor to go talk to to a witch. So the war kind of gets put on hold, and we look at Saul for a while. And then in chapter 28, we come back, or chapter 29, sorry, we come back, and we're looking at, it's getting even further. It's getting closer. War's about to be, but then all of a sudden it freezes again. And this time the war is put on hold so that we can then slowly pan out and look at what happens to David. David is dismissed from the war. Philistines say, you can go home, we don't trust you. And so David doesn't have to fight after all, and he starts going back home. And in chapter 30, we see that when he gets home, he finds the home fires are burning, but they're not in a controlled burn, right? 3-day trip that he takes back to Ziklag. Somewhere in that way, during that time, that war has to be raging. But the Bible writer says, we're not interested in the war right now. We panned out and we looked at Saul. What did he do? He looked at a witch. He went to a witch to find some instruction. What does David do as he's about to be in the same situation? He's in real trouble here in chapter 30. We're going to look at it. What does David do when he's in trouble? It's like it's begging you to compare. When Saul's in trouble, what's he do? When David's in trouble, what's he do? And that might reveal a little bit why he's a man after God's own heart. David, as chapter 30 starts, David and his men come to Ziklag home on the 3rd day. They'd been riding hard 50 to 60 miles over 2 days in rough terrain. And on the 3rd day they arrive at home. The Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag, and they had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire, taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. Surely they're going to sell them to Egyptian slavery. And when David's men came to the city, they found it burned with fire and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. They're exhausted from riding hard for 2.5 days. On the 3rd day, they get home. And even before they get there, they start seeing the smoke and they start feeling the dread and they start going, we think we know what happened here. The Amalekites had taken advantage of the fact that the men went off to fight war and the women stayed to keep the home fires burning, as we say. And they go in there and they take those people captive and they take them off to sell them and they burn the city. It's payback. David has been in the previous chapters raiding the Amalekites out there in the open areas. He's been raiding them and keeping them under control. But now that David's away, they come and they do payback. And they take the families, they uproot them, and they're gone. And what do these men do? These rough, tough men. What's your first reaction to something like this, being wronged like this? Well, it says, David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's 2 wives also had been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David was greatly distressed. The people spoke of stoning him because all the people were bitter in soul for each for his sons and his daughters. Upset, in sorrow, and furious, tired and exhausted. They lost their families and they blamed David. Bitter in soul. David's got real troubles on his hands. You can't help but see the connection. Saul's about to go into a war where he's going to die and he knows it. He's about to be in a real trouble spot. Saul is. David is actually in the same spot, only with different people. I'm curious about something, though. I want you to read verse 6, and if you are an underliner, if you underline in your Bible, I would encourage you in verse 6 to underline one of the strangest, most wonderful, odd verses that you'll find. It says, but David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Do you see that? But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. 2 things stand out. There's no question God is the supplier of strength, right? No question. He is the source of the strength that David receives in this moment. No question, it's God. But the verb is applied to David. David did something that allowed him to access the strength from the Lord. There's something he did in this moment. that was different than what Saul did. Saul consulted a witch, got more of God's disfavor, and he just put him further away from God. David, in the middle of this tense moment, you've got people angry at you, you're hurt, you're tired, you're exhausted, and something he did gave him access to the strength of God. What was it? He was as physically exhausted as anybody. He was as heartbroken. His wives were gone too. He was the one whose life was being threatened. So he's tired, he's emotionally overwhelmed, and he's scared. You ever been there? Tired, emotionally overwhelmed, and scared? You ever been any one of those three or a combination? It's a lonely place to be. It's an awful experience. It's a dread, right? And he chose in that moment to do something. And it doesn't say, I wish we had the video. Strengthen himself in the Lord his God. Not lash out like his men did. Not consult some strange medium like Saul did. He strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Just keep that in your head for a minute. We're going to finish the story. He got strength somehow because all of a sudden, as if he was a totally new man, some new David comes out. In the middle of a story, he finds his strength, he finds his direction and his focus, and notice what he does. David says to Abiathar the priest, notice where he goes. He goes to God's priest. That's the guy that God has set up to be an intercessory between God and his people. He goes to the right place. No witches. We don't need to go to witches. We've got God's approved people. So David, it says, went to Abiathar the priest, son of Ahimelech, bring me the ephod. It had the Urim and Thummim in it. And Abiathar brought the ephod to David, and David inquired of the Lord. Imagine that. When he wants to know what to do, he inquires of God. And the Lord said something. Hey, here's the question. Shall I pursue after this band of raiders? Shall I overtake them? Two questions. He answered him. God answered. And he apparently answered pretty quickly. Pursue, you will surely overtake, and you will surely rescue. So David set out. No wasting time, no little nap here, no Mountain Dew kick or anything like that. David set out, and 600 men who were with him, they came to the brook of Besor. I don't know how far that is, but there were 200 of them that stayed behind. They were too exhausted. Their families were taken captive, but they can't go any further. You ever been so tired, you can't take one more step? They left them there with their luggage or whatever. But David and 400 of his men kept up the pursuit. 200 stayed behind, too exhausted to cross. They found this Egyptian in open country. Interesting thing, this Egyptian had been taken captive by the Amalekites, but he'd gotten sick and he was requiring too much time, so they left him for dead. And he's out roaming around out there, not feeling very well, and he's roaming around in open country. So David and his men decide, we're going to feed him a little extra. We're going to be really kind to him because they find out that he is a slave to one of these Amalekite raiders. And so he said, listen, we won't turn you in. We won't kill you either. We're going to leave you alone. But can you tell us where they are? He said, yes, I will. I'll take you to them. And he takes them to them. And they're out there partying. They're partying and drinking it up, excited about all the stuff they got from all their raids. And they had tons of stuff and people that they'd been taken captive. They were drinking it up so good that David and his men were able to put a whooping on them for the whole next day. 400 of them got away on speeding camels. I don't know what a speeding camel is, but however fast that goes. 400 of them got away, but the rest of them David took captive or killed. Not one thing was lost. They recovered every single thing. And they make their way back home. And when they get back to that brook, the 200 people are overjoyed to see their family and they're reunited. But notice how it describes some of the men David left him. David came to the 200 men, verse 21, who had too exhausted to follow, and they had left at the brook Besor, and they went out to meet David and meet the people who were with him. And when David came near to the people to greet them, then all the wicked and worthless fellows among the men who had gone with David, what a great description. The people with David who were wicked and worthless. How would you like to have friends with you that you knew were wicked and worthless? But notice what they do. Since you guys didn't go fight, you don't get any of the spoils. Just take your stuff and go. And David said, we're not doing that. You're not going to do that. with what the Lord has given you. You guys didn't fight. This wasn't our battle. This was God's. He gave it to us. We're not going to claim victory for ourselves. He's preserved us, given to our hand the band that came against us. And so David says, forever and ever, even the people who stay behind get to share in the victory. It's a great statute, says verse 25. He sent the spoil off to different people, his friends, back to Judah. And so he started getting some more, people felt good about David because he did share the spoils with people. 2 men. That's how David handled this. Got victory, went back home, and everything was fine again. 2 men, 2 anointed, both of them to be kings or as a king already. One of them turns to a witch. The other one strengthens himself in God. One of them, when God said, go destroy the Amalekites, every single one of them didn't do it. That's probably why David had to fight here. If Saul had obeyed that command years ago, he might still be king, and these wouldn't have harmed David at all. But when God told him he didn't obey, this time God said, go get them and get your stuff back. And David did exactly what God asked. That still leaves the question. This is the question that should be on your mind. What in the world did David do? What did he actually do to strengthen himself in the Lord his God? And I've got to make up an answer, okay? But I'm going to be true to the context as best I can. David, knowing who he is, what he's done before, knowing 1 Samuel, I'm going to give you an answer because I really want you to know this. On those days when you're tired, overwhelmed, exhausted, scared, you can do something to put yourself in a position to receive the strength of God and continue not on your strength, but on his. And that may make all the difference in the world to you. So here's the first one. I can't prove any of these, and that's why I'm really uncomfortable with this, but I'm going to do the best I can. At the time of needing strength, gather around you people who share your faith and the intensity of your faith. Here's why I say that. I want to take you back to 1 Samuel 23. This is just 8 chapters before, 7 chapters before. And David was out in the wilderness running from Saul, and he was all just kind of out of sorts and stuff. And it says, and Jonathan, Saul's son, rose, went to David at Horesh, strengthened his hand in God. And he did that by saying to him, I want to remind you of the truth. I want to remind you of what you know. I want to remind you of what is absolutely true, no matter what you feel at this moment. I need to remind you because you're forgetting. And he says to him, do not fear. The hand of Saul, my father, will not find you. You will not be caught. You will be king, and I'm going to stand with you for every bit of it. This friend comes out to him, and when everybody else around him is feeling the same tension that David is, out comes somebody with truth and with calmness and tells him the truth. Now, here's the thing. I believe David had a bunch of worthless fellows with him. We find that out in the rest of the story. These people who are they don't know they don't evaluate by God's standards. They evaluate by worldly standards, and they just kind of go by impulse and their own kind of personalities. You need people in your life who share your worldview of being under God and in submission to him. And when those times when you feel particularly weak, you need to call upon them. That doesn't mean that you never go around other people, but listen, when you are in a vulnerable spot, and David knew he was tired, overwhelmed, and scared. He was not going to think straight. He needed to gather some good people around him and say, tell me something, y'all. I need to hear some truth. You control who influences you. And you know those people that when you get around them, you get a little more pessimistic, you get a little more gossipy, you get a little more blah, 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 any of these other, and you start because being around them brings you down a little bit. That doesn't mean you don't be around them anymore. But when you start seeing that, and you need to be brought up, and you need to be brought up in the truth of God, gather around you the right people. You are responsible for the influences you allow in your life. You get that, right? You are responsible for the influences you allow in your life. Take monitoring of yourself. You find yourself weakening spiritually because you're just around people who don't share your worldview. Find some time to get around them. I think David took a few minutes at least And he knew who they were out of this 600 traveling with him. He knew he had worthless fellows. He knew it. But he also knew he had some godly ones. I believe he had a special cabinet meeting, and he gathered around these good people and said, remind me, tell me what I should be thinking here. You need people to remind you of who you are and who God is. Because no matter how strong your faith is, you have moments of vulnerability when you are weak, overwhelmed, exhausted, and scared, and you are simply not thinking right. When you gather strength of God, God says, you know where my strength is? It's in my people. Find my people. Gather my people around you and listen. That's one way. Second, I think David knew he had to interpret this properly because he was not in the right mind. You would never be. You ever been on a family vacation for a week? At the end of that week, you're not in your right mind. No one's in their right mind. You want to kill somebody. You want to go find a stranger and live with them for a day. You know, you know those patterns of life. You know those places and times in life when you're particularly weak. And so what happens is being upset, you don't have the right judgment. Being tired, you don't have the right judgment. And you gather around you some good people if you can. But then you take some time, whatever time that you can muster, and you pray with God. There is no particular Psalm of David that is stated as to being written right here. But I'm pretty sure there probably is one. David just didn't list it. There's 16, 17, 18 that tell us the exact circumstance, and then there's dozens that tell us nothing about when they were written, just kind of guessing. But listen to Psalm 46 for a minute. And see if this doesn't describe David's situation at the moment. God is our refuge and strength, a very present help in trouble. Therefore, we will not fear, though the earth gives way, though the mountains are moved into the heart of the sea. Next screen. Though its waters roar and foam, though the mountains tremble at their swelling. He's not describing an earthquake. He says, when your world is turned upside down, God will be your refuge. And then at the end, be still and know that I am God. I am going to exalt my people. What this psalm says is he just kind of lets out the emotion. My world's upside down. I don't know what to do. I'm overwhelmed by all this stuff, God. I need a proper interpretation. I need some time with you to get this straight, to be able to put it on you. And in the rest of the Psalms, so many times when this happens, a lament or a cry for help, what ends up happening is the psalmist says to God what he needs to do, asks for God help, and then get busy working to make that help happen, right? And so in this psalm, I'm going to give this to God. I'm going to take a few minutes. You guys, you kind of settle down over there, get a drink of water. I'm going to come up on this hill over here, or find this small cave over here, and I'm just going to remind myself that God is over this. I'm going to take charge of this. Praying allows you to get your mind right, to focus on the right thing. And so you sing a couple of songs. I will call upon the Lord, right? Or unto thee, O Lord. That's another one a lot of people think. Psalm 25 was written at this time. There's no way to prove it, but it's interesting. Unto you I cry, God. I need to spend some time with you and get my mindset right. God's going to take care of me in this. And as a result of that, he then walks down from that cave wherever he was, and he finds Abiathar the priest, and he finds out what God's will is. Slow this thing down. Slow this thing down just a little bit and remind yourself, God's still in control of this deal. God's still over this thing. Breathe. Find some time to get with him. It doesn't require an hour of prayer. I guarantee he didn't have an hour of prayer with those guys feeling so intense about their emotions, and himself too. But I guarantee too, he found some time and he got his mind right. Third, I have to think that he started meditating, and I don't mean like, sitting for 45 minutes. I mean reviewing in his mind some truth that he knows. It's amazing when you read the Psalms that they start reciting old history stuff. what God has done in the past. It's like, I'm going to remember what he did for our forefathers in Egypt. I'm going to remember him rescuing them through the Red Sea because I need a Red Sea deliverance myself. It's what they did. They started reciting these things that God had done. Now, we're going to do this for a second, but I'll tell you, do you ever be with people who you feel what the momentum of the moment would have you feel? You're watching a basketball game and your team goes down by 5 and you throw in the towel. That's it. Cardinal fans are notorious for this. I hate them. I ain't going to watch them anymore. Next night, you're out there doing it again. I was Talmadge and Bonita Fields. I'd sit and talk with them. They're just a hoot. But anyway, during Talmadge's funeral, in preparation for it, she told me the story. Actually, Jamie did, because they were eating together one day and told the story. The Talmadge would wear the same sweatshirt at every Razorback basketball game. And he would just cheer them on. But they would go down. They would start playing terribly. He'd peel that shirt off and throw it in the floor, turn the channel and saying, ever watching them again? 2 nights later, he'd had that sweatshirt on. He'd turn the TV on and he'd try again. That's what Razorback fans do. That's what Razorback fans do. You swerve by the momentum of the moment. The thing that keeps a Christian buoyed is the truth he or she knows. And by reciting that truth, and I can see David, he's riding a camel or he's riding a horse, and he's reciting these verses. I want to give you some of them. Here they are. Therefore, my beloved, as you have always obeyed, so now, not only is in my presence, but now much more in my absence, work out your own salvation with fear and trembling. For it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. God works it in you, you work it out. God provides it, he puts it in there, and then you figure out, you do things to tap into it and actually live it out in the world. Great verse. Next one. For this I toil. This is Paul talking in Colossians. For this I toil, struggling with all, whose energy? Whose energy is it? His energy that he powerfully works within me. I'm going to keep working and I'm going to trust that the energy's there. And Paul, if you read his missionary journeys, I'm going to tell you the only way you can explain getting back up after being stoned, left for dead, and to walk back in there, the only explanation is it wasn't his power. That's the only way you can explain it. And so Colossians tells us, as Paul tells us, next one. Whoever speaks, this is talking about your gifts, right? Whoever speaks should speak as one speaking the oracles of God. Whoever serves as one who serves by the strength that God supplies. If God asks you to serve him, he also gives you the strength to serve out of. That's what Peter says. So he'll never ask you to do something he won't also give you the energy to do. And that's something that you need to remember in your head. Next one. Finally, be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the whole armor of God that you may be able to stand against the schemes of the devil. You are not going on your own strength, right? You're putting armor on, but you know whose armor this is? If you read Isaiah, it describes God in this exact armor. It's like God says, hey, I'll give you my armor. I'll put my armor on you. Now you go fight. And so he says, be strong in the Lord and the power of his might. And so God says, I'm going to give you power. I'll give you power if you just take a stand for me. Next screen. Fear not, for I am with you. Do not be dismayed. I am your God. I will strengthen you. I will help you. I will uphold you with my righteous right hand. Meditate on that while you're riding down the hill, getting ready for war. Next one. And my God will supply every need of yours according to his riches and the glory in Christ Jesus. One more. God is able to make all grace abound to you so that having all sufficiency in all things at all times, you may abound in every good work. The verses are there. The truths are conveyed. And it's up to us to put those truths in our head and then meditate on them as we're needing them. What happens when you need them and you never put them there? You're not able to strengthen yourself in the Lord your God. And that's what David did. Okay, a fourth thing, last thing. He got busy doing what was right. He did God's will. He consulted the priest. The priest says, yes, you're going to get victory. Now go to it. But that didn't win the victory. God didn't win the victory by promising a victory. God gave strength by promising the victory. But David still had to mount up, go in pursuit, and use the tactics he knew. The interesting thing is, as he's writing, he knows the Lord is going to help him. He knows what the outcome is. He knows that God is going to help them. And so he keeps his eyes open. As he's traveling through the wilderness, he's kind of keeping his eyes open. How's God going to help me? I know he is, because I already know how this is going to end, and I know God's going to help me with it. And he sees this weird Egyptian guy, nearly dead. And he stops, and I have to think, as you're traveling down there and you're looking for God's help, you keep looking for God's help. You start looking at things. Could God help with that? That's a possibility. Who is this Egyptian? You usually wouldn't waste your time on some meandering individual out in the woods, right? But for him, he stops and he finds out it's one of the slaves of the Amalekites that they left for dead out in the wilderness. I wonder if he knows anything. They start inquiring about him, and he knows exactly where they are. You think that's a coincidence? Do you think it's just a coincidence that an Egyptian got kind of sick and they left him behind? I kind of think not. I kind of think what you should look at is when you're going through there and you're doing what God told you to do and you're looking for God's help, suddenly your eyes open to the possibilities of what he might be delivering you as a gift on this trip. Keep your eyes open. Keep your mind open. Reminds me a little bit about Elijah. When he went through that severe depression after that great victory on Mount Carmel, and then Jezebel says, I'm going to come after you and kill you, right? And he just goes into this horrible depression, and God has to really come after him. And he believes lies. He thinks he's the only one left, all this kind of stuff that he does. But one of the things God does is this: Elijah, get out. I got work for you to do. I've got you to go and find the next prophet, and I've got you to go and anoint the next king. I've got work for you to do. I can't imagine an American not appreciating this. God says, I will strengthen you. I will give you victory, but you are going to have to fight. But when you go and fight, it's not like wondering if you're going to win. It's not like, I don't know if this is going to end right or not. David fought knowing how the story was going to end because God told him. And I can't imagine when you are doing things in your life, when you start doing things that you know are right, that you know are God's will, there is a sense of strength and energy that comes when you know you're doing right. When you are doing things that you know are questionable, and I'd like to think you're engaged in something you know is wrong, it zaps your strength because you absolutely know this is not right. But when you engage in things you know are right, the energy that comes, you start making, I think about this. You ever wonder, like when your kids, you ask your kids to do something for you at home, and they just murmur and they complain and they're slow and they're draggy. They obviously don't want to do it. But then you say, hey, I need you to do this for someone at church. All of a sudden, it's like, oh, okay. Yeah, I know it's going to help Randy Simpkins because, he needs some help. He really needs help. And so I'm going to help him do that. And for some reason, they have no problem mustering their energy. Now, they shouldn't have for either one of those scenarios, but we know how this works sometimes. When you know something is the right thing and you do it, energy comes with it. David strengthened himself and the Lord is God. He got around godly people who evaluated from a biblical perspective. He prayed and got his mind set right. He consulted the right things and he meditated on the right words that he knows is true because God said them. And if God said them, they're always true. And if you remind yourself of them, they reorient your mind. And then he got up and he did what God asked him to do. That's strengthening yourself on the Lord, your God. And the victory was just a matter of time. You're going to be at the end of your strength sometimes when you parent your kids. You're going to be saying to yourself, I just got nothing left. You're going to believe that I can't take another step. And when you're in this spot, you have to do something because you can't just stop and quit. You must do something. And David teaches us, when you get to that moment, strengthen yourself in the Lord your God. Don't go to witches, go to God. The joy of the Lord is our strength, and the joy of the Lord does come to us if we will just go to Him. He's got the strength, He's willing to give, but there's something you do to tap into it. Do it, get that strength, and go on and do the right thing. That's how you describe and explain 1 Samuel chapter 30. And that's so relevant to your life because you're going to have moments like that. And learn, underline verse 6b, David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. And put your name there sometimes. I need to strengthen myself in the Lord my God. And when you need that strength, do what you need to do for God to give it to you. If there's anyone who is spiritually weak tonight, whether you've never turned your life over to God ever by naming Jesus the Lord of your life, or whether you've done that and for some reason you've gone adrift and you're wondering, where's my strength at? Why not turn to the Lord for His strength? You can do that through confession and obeying Scripture, doing what you need to do, or in the group of God's people, trying to live by His worldview together. Whatever you need to do, if we can help strengthen you in the Lord your God, do so. Come forward now as we stand and as we sing.